Familiar odors can evoke emotional reactions through classical conditioning. They can also evoke involuntary memories. Involuntary memories refer to spontaneous recollection of autobiographical memories, or AMs, without deliberate effort. Voluntary memories refer to memories remembered as a result of goal-directed, conscious effort. Compared to voluntary memories, involuntary memories tend to be more vivid, detailed, and automatic. So they define right here automatic, and then they define right here voluntary memories. Okay, so let's keep reading. So then they say Alzheimer's disease, or AD. Patients have limited access to their AMs, including those AMs that shape their sense of self. Some researchers hypothesize, and so now when I'm reading this word that says hypothesize, I'd like to highlight it. Hypothesize that this is linked to the diminished sense of identity experience in AD. So we're going to go ahead and highlight this. Study 1, again, I'm going to highlight it one more time so I know where it is. Was designed to examine whether odors or music could be used to invoke AMs in patients with AD. The music condition was included because previous studies have indicated that, like odors, music can invoke involuntary memories. Participants were early stage AD patients and age-matched controls who were all screened for depression and anxiety. And so they were screened for depression and anxiety. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight that right here. They were asked to recount in detail an event in their life under three conditions. Okay, so I like to highlight something that they always took note of. While listening to well-known classical musical melody, or while exposed to two separate odors, vanilla and coffee, and without exposure to any stimuli. Participant reports were recorded and coded by two independent raters blind to the conditions of the study. So I'm gonna highlight because they describe how they conducted the study by recording it. And then automaticity of the AMs were assessed through retrieval time, defined as the time between the end of the instructions and onset of the participant's memory report. So then they're saying raters now. Raters also coded whether each AM was general. Like for instance, my father always had pancakes for breakfast, or specific, like something like, or for instance, my father was having pancakes when I woke up that day. Finally, the raters also analyzed the AMs for number of details included. So they kind of just like give like a detail or non-detail report. Okay. So in the last paragraph, they're saying that the results indicated that overall AMs of control participants were more automatic, detailed, and specific than those of AD participants. In addition, AMs of AD participants were more automatic, detailed, and specific under the order condition than the other two conditions. Question number 1. Which types of memories are involuntary and voluntary memories respectively? So they're basically like talking about the first paragraph right here, where they talk about that involuntary memories are referred to as spontaneous recollection of autobiographical memories, or AMs, without deliberate effort. And they're saying voluntary memories refer to memories remembered as a result of goal-directed, conscious effort. Compared to voluntary memories, involuntary memories tend to be more vivid, detailed, and automatic. And so if you look at answer choice right here, they say like implicit and explicit. So to kind of define these terms, explicit is something that like it's a conscious type of behavior. For example, like we are consciously like talking to someone, like choosing our words and how we speak, and it's like more of a controlled behavior. Now something like implicit behavior, it's like something more procedural skill. For example, like riding with our pencil, or like riding our bike. That's something that comes to us unconsciously because it's a procedure type thing. We don't have to take that much effort to kind of do what we do, like whether it be like riding a bike or riding a pencil, or like using our pencil. And then as again explicit, something when we have to consciously do and take effort to do something. Like for example, talking to someone, the way we choose words. That's something more explicit. So now let's go through like our answer choices one by one. So let's look at involuntary. Let's look back at the passage. And so it said involuntary are like they refer to a spontaneous recollection, and so they are like without deliberate effort. So meaning that if they're saying, and this is a big hint right here, because a lot of people when they try to solve this problem, they'll think right away, oh wait, involuntary is like something maybe implicit because you're based on this name right here, you have to be recalling something like unconditionally, or like unconsciously. But the case right here, the keyword they give us like without deliberate effort. And so this has to be explicit, because if you miss this keyword right here, you'll probably get this question wrong. And so they're basically telling us that involuntary memories are explicit, because why? Because we can recall them without deliberate effort. And so we can choose something right away that matches with explicit. So we can eliminate C and D right off the bat. And then, okay, now we know that involuntary is explicit. Now, so what about our last one? Voluntary. This and so basically, voluntary memories refer to memories being remembered as a result of goal-oriented, conscious effort. So again, but remember that example I gave about you need to like to have conscious effort to speak with someone. You choose your words wisely. You cannot like unconsciously like talk to someone in a way that like is good. So it takes conscious effort. So again, voluntary memories are conscious as well. So we can see that they're both explicit because one, they said in this passage that involuntary memories they being recalled without deliberate effort, and then they're saying right here for voluntary memories, they're conscious effort. They're like they have to be remembered through conscious effort. And so A makes the most sense, and B is the incorrect answer. Okay, question number one. Participants in study one were most likely to be screened for which symptom? So now let's go back and study one. So they were trying to like right here. So we highlight this part right here where they said that participants with were early stage AD patients and age matched controls who were all screened for depression and anxiety. So they were screened for depression and anxiety specifically. So we can go through our answer choices one by one and kind of figure out like which one of these involves with something with like depression or anxiety. So let's start with A. So if we look at compulsive behaviors, right? Something it's like when we do like let's say for example it's like someone with OCD. It's like that's something they have to do it over again, even though they have cleaned before. It's like the sudden urge to do something again and make sure they did it right. And so compulsive really is more like a repetitive behavior rather than like something someone's being depressed or has anxiety. So A is not good at answer choice so far. We can move on and go to answer choice B. Delusional ideation. So it's like something when it's like someone creates a delusional idea based off the question like the answer like name right here, delusional ideation. You can kind of assume that they're creating some like delusional image in their head and kind of making a story up. But this doesn't really have to do anything with like depression or anxiety because that's what the researchers are trying to screen for. So A and B are not good answer choices either. They're describing something like another behavior type, nothing to do with depression or anxiety. And then C, disorganized speech. So really, again, same with A and B. Like, if you think about it, disorganized speech is when we like, serious speech like disorganized. It's like we don't create like clear sentences. Like, for example, someone with like, Wernicke's, or, some type of like, neurological like disease in which they can, create disorganized speech. And so really this has nothing to do with depression or anxiety. So for the same reason, we can eliminate C. So this leaves just with answer choice D. And so this should be like, and this answer should make the most sense because if you think about it, like, when you have like sleep disturbances, this changes our emotional well-being. So like if we don't get enough like, full like of that 90-minute sleep cycle, it affects our emotions. In this case, it'll affect our depression, anxiety. And so this will make the most sense because this affects our emotional well-being a lot. So D makes the correct answer and it makes the most sense. Question number two. Which receptor were most likely activated by stimuli used in study one? So let's go in study one. They said right here, study one was designed to examine whether orders or music could be used to invoke AMs in patients with AD. And then they're saying that the music condition was included because previous studies would have indicated that like orders, music can invoke involuntary memories. So basically right here, they were using something like with music and a smell basically. So what type of like receptors basically get stimulated by like for these types of things like music for like sound and like smell. So that's basically what the question is asking right here based on your answer choices. So let's go find what type of receptors. Go with hearing and smell. So right off the bat, I'm looking through like I can eliminate a couple of things right off the bat because I'm looking at noise receptors. So if you remember your content review, these receptors are known for pain. So like when these things get triggered, we feel a painful sensation. So I mean, I don't know about you, but like hearing and smelling don't cause pain at all. So we can immediately eliminate B and like C right off the bat. So this just leaves A and D left. And so then we can also eliminate D as well because photoreceptors, those are the ones that like are in our eyes and that allows us to like see visual images. Smelling and hearing don't have photoreceptors. They have more like of mechanical receptors and then like chemical messenger receptors as well. So we can eliminate D as well because there's no photoreceptors in either of those and it's just the eyes. And then if you look at A, it makes the most sense because chemoreceptors come from like our nose, which like when we smell stuff, right, we have like a molecule or it goes into our receptors, and that's what triggers the smelling. Like we can smell like a food or an item. And then mechanoreceptors, it's like in your cochlea, you have these little tiny hair cells, and which they detect sound motion. It's like a motion comes through. Those hair cells move, and then they send like a signal to the brain to like they have registered a sound from the ear. So A will make the most sense, and then that is the correct answer. Question number three. What is the most likely function of familiar orders in the classical conditioning paradigm mentioned in the first paragraph? And so let's go to the first paragraph right here. They say in the first sentence, familiar orders can invoke emotional reactions through classical conditioning. So this is like a high-yield term for classical conditioning, which by the, this thing right here, the term, that you should know this for your MCAT. This is very high yield, and you should be very comfortable with it, and should be able to do like upside down, underwater, blindfolded, with hands tied behind your back. That's how well you have to know the term for classical conditioning, because this will show up often a lot in the MCAT. And so basically, they're saying that like this familiar order has become like a conditioned stimulus. So like when the person is like um, shown this conditioned stimulus, then they invoke this thing called like an involuntary memory. And so something that memory isn't like paired with. So in this case, the smell was associated with the memory. And so when they smell the odor, then they get this memory, which they involuntarily get because it's a conditioned stimulus. So if you don't know what classical condition is, I suggest you look up on your own because this video is only going through questions. So I suggest you look at it first before you continue watching this, okay? So now let's go to the answer choices one by one. They're saying right here, appetitive stimulus. So appetitive stimulus is like something like, as you can tell by the, the name of this answer choice, it's something that like, that, invokes our appetite basically. It's something like that can be food, that can be like a type of smell. It just causes like some like, like hunger sensation. This isn't really talking about like an emotional reaction. It's more of like a hunger, like like for the sake of say like satiety, right? It's not talking about anything emotional. This is for hunger, basically. So A is not a good answer. We can come back to that if there's nothing else better. Now B, discriminant stimulus. It's something like this is more something to do with like if you recall like operant conditioning. So this is like when we we can like tell the difference between like if something will be a punishment or like it can be or a reward. So like for example, you're at a stoplight, right? The light turns green. You know that it won't punish you because it means that you're allowed to go ahead. So you're able to like discern or like tell like if whether or not this the punishment you can tell you whether you'll receive a punishment or a reward. So you can tell like the difference between that. And so they're talking about classical. This is talking about operant. So this makes B incorrect as well. So then we can move to answer choice C. Now this right here, condition stimulus, is like what we exactly talked about right before going to the answer choices. The odor is invoking the involuntary memory because it's a conditioned stimulus. And so this is like the definition of for like the classical conditioning. So C is a good answer choice so far. It's a much better answer choice than A. So I'm gonna keep this for now. Now let's look at answer choice D, unconditioned stimulus. Now this will be wrong because of the opposite reason. Because unconditioned stimulus is when something like, let's say for example, this whole thing was unconditioned. So let's say we just present the person with order, they may not get a involuntary memory because that order was not conditioned with the involuntary memory. So if someone, let's say, never had the memory associated with the smell, then they'll never able to like involuntarily retrieve that memory because if it will be like considered a unconditioned stimulus if that didn't happen. So makes the most sense because like again, smell is conditioned. It's a conditional stimulus. It invokes our involuntary memories. And so C is the correct answer. Question number 4. What is the most likely reason that the independent raters in study 1 were blinded? To prevent the potential impact of. So let's go back here. They said this in paragraph 4. Participants Participant reports were recorded and coded by 2 independent raters blind to the conditions of the study. So why would they blind them to the conditions of the study? So you can think this for a lot of reasons. So let's say if the raters or the people that were taking the results from the participants, let's say if they found out the experimental conditions, they might be like biased in a way such that they try to line up with the condition study or go kind of against it. So like this can like potentially affect the results in which the researchers are trying to like go for. So let's go ahead and answer choices, kind of find something that kind of fits the definition of what's kind of going on here. Like we want something with like the bias with the researchers basically, like in the research, like in the experiment. So let's go through our answer choices one by one. A, reactivity. And so reactivity, if you think about it, like from your content review, it's like basically when you did your experimental studies like for your content, it's when a participant, it like picks up it realizes that like it's being observed by the observer, and so it'll tend to change its behavior. Here's the reason why it's like wrong though. It's because they're talking about like the raters themselves, the people that are recording the participants. This applies mostly to the participants because like they're the ones that are like change their behavior based on them being watched. They're talking about in this question the raters, like why were the independent raters blindfolded? So like this has nothing to do with the participants themselves, but rather the like the raters, because they're the ones who are not changing their behavior because of what they're seeing. It's the participants themselves that are reacting to the observers. So in this case, it cannot be A because for that very reason. And now B, confirmation bias. And so this lines up what we just talked about just now. Confirmation bias is the tendency when to like make confirm that information that's already been there without like kind of evaluating like other choices. So like we just kind of, for example, we try to confirm our own thoughts when like we see one piece of evidence without like kind of going off of other like ideas as well. We're kind of like we're locked in into that one idea. And so right here, if like if the independent raters were not blindfolded and they were exposed to like what's the purpose behind the study, they were more likely kind of conform to the idea of like what the experiment was trying to go for. So there would be more likely for confirmation bias to happen. And so this is applying to the rater, and so this would make the most sense. Now let's look at C, and then I'll actually also talk about D as well, because notice that from like A, C, and D, these are very similar answers. In that case, that they're talking about the participants rather than the independent raters themselves. Because if you look at it, C right here, it says social desirability bias. It's when the participant like picks up like social cues from the observer, and they tend to change their behavior to line up with the study. This is coming from the participant, not the rater themselves. So AC doesn't make any sense, and then D is the same thing as C almost. It said that they pick up like C, they pick up characteristics and like of the observer, and the participant like changes their report or behavior. They're talking about the raters themselves, the people that are taking the data from the participants. So this doesn't apply to them at all. This only applies to the actual participants with the reports. So D doesn't make sense either, and B makes the most sense because this is talking about like what the raters would do if they were exposed to the experimental study, like what's the conditions of the study, in which is the case they will kind of like confirm to the idea that this is what that study was looking for, and they won't like they'll be pretty biased with like not making their own informed decisions. And so B would be the correct answer. Question number 5. Which component of the passage is most relevant to humanistic theory? So now recall from your like your content review, humanistic theory is like something like that's more like emphasizing about like human goodwill, human like self-actualization, or like something like that's not really like our behavior stems from like because of our goodwill, because we're good people and we want to help others, and so if we are focused on like improving ourselves. So let's go ahead and like kind of go through the answer choices one by one and see what lines up most with the humanistic theory. So let's look at A. It says the role of familiar odors in AM's first paragraph. So they talk about right here like how like this condition of odors invokes involuntary memories. This is like the textbook definition of like classical conditioning. This is more of a behavioral term rather than something that's humanistic. So we can eliminate A right off the bat because we're looking for something that shows human growth based on like our own self, not because of like some behavior conditioning. So A doesn't make any sense at all. Now let's look at B, the relationship between AMs and identity. Okay, so they say right here, they said some researchers hypothesize that it is linked to the diminished sense of identity experienced AD. Study one designed to examine whether odors or music could be used to invoke AMs in patients with AD. The the music condition was also included because previous studies have indicated like odors, music can also invoke involuntary memories. They also say right up here that those with AMs that shape their sense of self. So that's kind of a term right here if you want to pay attention to sense of self. So like you know the humanistic theory, it's focused on ourself and our well-being. It's focused on how we grow as a human being. So sense of self, this will make the most sense because we want because we're shaped because our self and the way we grow. So this paragraph right here makes the most sense. So I want to keep this for now and like kind of look at the answer choices and see what if there's any better than B. But B so far emphasizes what I'm looking for. It's looking for growth, nothing with behavior like theory. It's more on about ourselves. Okay, so now let's go with C. Next, the definition of specificity in AM. So paragraph 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Paragraph 4. They say right here the definition of specificity is retrieval time. So they're saying right here the AMs was assessed through retrieval time, defines the time between the end of instructions and onset participants' memory report. So they're talking about like retrieval. There's nothing to do with like human growth or anything. This doesn't really have to do match up with the humanistic theory. This is more talking about like our cognitive retrieval, more like it's not really talking about like Maslow's like, okay, we're improving ourselves, we grow ourselves over time towards like self-actualization. So C doesn't make sense either. It's more again more of like coding specificity. It's like talking about retrieval. Doesn't make sense to me. Now let's look at D finally. It says right here um, they were more automatic, detailed, and specific than those 80 participants. In addition, AMs of 80 participants were automatic, detailed, and specific under the order condition than the other two conditions. So kind of very similar to like paragraph 4, where they talked about like retrieval, but this is talking about the accuracy of the retrieval of like the memory they have. So since these two are very similar, I can limit D, and then I'm left with answer choice B. B makes the most sense because A talks about a behavioral component that's not involved with like humanistic theory, and these two talk about like memory retrieval. They don't talk about anything similar to the humanistic theory. This makes the most sense because they are saying including those AMs that shape their sense of self. They hypothesize that this is linked to the diminished sense of identity experience. Identity, that's a keyword for this sense of self, identity experience. These are keywords for humanistic theory. And so B makes the most sense because of that.